Jarred Castell always thought things through. This was why his friends and family were so puzzled when he got engaged within weeks of meeting his future wife Katie at a Brisbane bar. But they never could have predicted the woman would go on to kill him because he returned home 2 hours late from work one night. Days after Katie Castell was sentenced by the Brisbane Supreme Court to 9 years jail for stabbing Jarred to death, the slain 35-year-old's family have revealed the years of domestic violence hell he endured before the mother of his child threw a 20-centimetre kitchen knife into his heart and killed him hours after he closed a business deal that would have transformed their lives. Jarred met Katie by chance at Brisbane institution, the Royal Exchange Hotel, in 2008 after she had been stood up. 2 weeks later, the pair were secretly engaged. They moved in together months later and were married by mid-2010. From the start, friends and family noticed the couple were oddly close. They were the kind of couple who were very, very physical in public, a friend said. It was young love and we were all in our 20s, but they were particularly all over each other. They had nicknames for each other, Lamb and Bean. It was like they had a different language and they just interacted in a way that was unlike other couples. Their wedding day was all about Katie, Jarred's sister, said. After the wedding, things began to change. Those undercurrents and undertones that were always within Katie really started to come out. Katie was a senior nurse at the Wesley Hospital, and Jarred was a property consultant and shop fitter. He owned 2 houses before the age of 21. He had a plan to get himself ahead so that in the prime of his life he could relax and have a family. When Katie fell pregnant with their son, she quit her job and returned to university to study literature before starting a fashion business. They were very standoffish after they were married. Jarred's father, Tony Castell, said, "I think I had one meal at their house in all the time they were together." Jarred's close friend says Katie was all about control. She caused rifts between herself and Jarred's friends and stopped attending social gatherings. Jarred started coming alone or making an excuse to leave, and slowly over time that dropped off. More and more he would say, "I can't stay, I've got to get home." She had put him in a place where he couldn't go out without her wrath. Katie would be quite angry if he didn't come back home from work on time, and that was always a big issue for them. The family said the argument about him returning at 8 p.m, which led to his death, was the 6th incident of domestic violence against him that day. After Jarred was killed, Ryan noticed a wall in his brother's dining room had been replastered. I later found out Katie had thrown a chair at him and Jarred had gone and plastered the wall back up, he said. Tony said the family were kept at arm's length from the couple, but he knew something wasn't right. On the night of December 20th, 2017, Tony took a call from Katie. He'd spoken to Jarred only a few hours earlier, so he thought it was a bit strange. He had just won a massive contract at work that would have completely altered his business, and he'd just closed the deal, so he called to tell me, Tony said. I was in Melbourne for work and Katie was on the phone hysterical, saying Jarred had been stabbed and was on the way to the hospital. Ryan raced to the hospital but learned on the way Jarred had died. At the same time, his mother, who has terminal cancer, was leaving home in an emergency. The police walked down the driveway and told her what had happened as she was getting in the car to leave for the hospital. Ryan said he spent the whole night with his mother and held her while she cried. Initially, the family believed it was a terrible accident. It wasn't until later they found out the truth and that Jarred's 4-year-old son saw the incident unfold. Katie was charged with Jarred's murder 6 hours after he died. 1 month later, she penned a bizarre 12-page letter to his parents from prison, telling them to rest in Jesus. The night I lost Jarred, they put me in the Brisbane watch house. It was truly the bowels of hell, a concrete cell with a tiny window I couldn't see out of, graffiti on every inch, no underwear and a couple of plastic-covered cushions, she wrote. Katie described herself in the letter as a novelty in jail and only one person who doesn't have a drug charge. I'm glad I have had an open mind, and I sometimes feel it's a privilege to be living amongst the most vulnerable and marginalised in society, she wrote. In a similar letter penned to Justice Jean Dalton, Katie tried to minimise her culpability. I hope these thoughts will give you some understanding of who I am as a person, how sorry I am, and how my husband's death has affected my life, she wrote. I feel deeply the shame of being a prisoner. It is utterly demoralising and demonising to be inherently mistrusted, to have your individuality ignored, and be herded and lined up and counted like livestock every day. She goes on to describe her role in prison to bring salvation to others, and in the letter that Justin Dalton described as very odd. Jarred's family have said that domestic violence killers should receive mandatory sentences. The rights of the child left behind should also be forefront when balancing the visitation rights of the incarcerated against the impact of the child, Tony said. Offending of this kind should have its own piece of legislation, with mandatory sentencing and a framework into the future. In the argument, Katie threw a laptop at Jarred and then picked up a large kitchen knife, scratched her wrists with it before throwing it at her husband, and the prosecution said it fatally struck the shirtless Mr. Castell in the chest and pierced his heart. The depth of the wound was at least 4 centimetres. The court heard Miss Castell went to grab a towel to stop the bleeding and called 000. What surprised me about this case is the length of the sentence. 9 years for manslaughter, when if this had happened in America, it would be much longer, I think at least 15 years or more. Is anyone thinking like me that 9 years and, being out less for good behaviour is just not enough for the taking of a life?